submit. Hello, folks. Hello, hello.
Oh dear.
Hello. Everybody can hear me okay? Good to see everybody. Welcome, welcome. We are just getting started here. Nice to see all these lovely faces.
Hey, Anne.
Hello. It's great to have a conversation about endurance leadership when your endurance leadership coach is on the call, which is really great. So pretty fun. We're going to wait a couple more minutes. I think we've got several people who are coming on. We were having a little challenge with the YouTube live streaming. So hopefully we're going to be changing that link and providing that information. So hope to have some other folks joining us. Welcome, welcome. Good to see everyone.
Sorry, I have to have a drink. I just got off the spin bike.
Spoken like a true athlete. Hello, hello. Nice to see everyone. Hi, Luis. It's great to have you with us. So I think there will be some more folks joining us in a couple of minutes. We're going to just wait. There should be at least about 10 of us, hopefully, coming on. Nice to see all these great faces. And Lindsay Shima is my awesome assistant here today. She is a colleague who's helping me out on the technical end. So as we go through the presentation, we are going to have Lindsay kind of helping me monitor chat. Hopefully everyone can see the screen. And I think we're going to just go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone. This is my session on endurance leadership, and I am so glad to have you here for this discussion. I hope it's going to be an interesting and thought-provoking journey into the mental and behavioral strategies that leaders can leverage to succeed, not just for today or for a few years, but really for decades. Things that leaders can utilize to keep them focused, challenged, energized, and supported. I am Dr. Ann Bowers Evangelista, and I'm the president of Llumos. We are a boutique consultancy helping leaders and organizations thrive for the long term. So before I get started, I think I know just about everyone here, but I would love to know a little bit about if folks want to use the chat and maybe allow other people to know who I have in the audience here in terms of, are you an athlete? Are you a leader? Are you a manager? Are you here just because you're interested? Are you none of the above? Are you all of the above? Would love to hear a little bit about who is here. We can all know each other. Throw in the chat who you are.
Okay, well, if you can hear me, I'll start by saying I like to think I'm all of the above.
Great, Rose. Thanks very much. All right, Rose. Thanks for being here from Milano, Rose. Piacere. It's great to see you. Luis is trying to be all of the above. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thanks so much. I have some other lovely fans in the audience who happen to be related to me, which I'm happy about. Karen, I'm so glad you're here, focusing on leadership development. And my lovely sister Patty is a coach as well. She is a parent coach. So excited to have all of you here, and Lindsay is a doctoral student and a great colleague. So great, so glad to have you here. I want to start by talking about this whole notion of endurance leadership by sharing with you a couple of stories. And the first story is actually about me. So around 9 a.m. the morning of August 6, 2011, I was on a bike ride and I was training for an Ironman race with several other people. Suddenly, and an Ironman, for those of you who might not know, is a pretty challenging endeavor with 2.4 miles of swimming, 110 miles of bike ride, followed by a marathon, 26-mile and 6.2 mile run. So I was training away with a number of people, and suddenly a dog came out of nowhere and ran straight at my bike. I, of course, slammed on my brakes. I didn't have much choice. And there was someone riding right behind me, and in cycling nomenclature was drafting off of me. So his back wheel was about 5 inches. His front wheel was about 5 inches from my back wheel. And he really didn't have time to stop. So he slammed into me, and my body kind of went projectile into the air. And the last sound I heard was the sound of my own screams, actually, as my body hit the ground, hip, elbow, head. When I awoke, I was in the ER, and I'd learned that I had broken my hip. And shortly after, I underwent surgery that required left me with an 8-inch garage and several screws in my hip. So when I could consciously process my fate, I was pretty devastated to learn that my dream of finishing the Ironman was not only gone for the moment, it was potentially gone forever. And more dire, I wasn't sure I was ever going to be able to walk the same way again. But I'm an endurance athlete, and what do? We endure. So I did learn to walk again. I went from wheelchair to walker to cane. I learned to walk again independently, and then I began running. 8 months after that terrible day, I finished a half Ironman race. And 4 years later, I realized my dream of finishing an Ironman race. The second story of endurance is really about my endurance leader friend, James, or we'll call him James. So James is also an endurance athlete, just happens to be. He's an ultra marathoner, meaning he runs distances of 50 miles or more, like some other people that are on this call. He's also an endurance leader. And James built his career in finance. He moved from early positions in accounting to being a comptroller to being a CFO to being a CEO. And his first CEO job was to build a hospital from the ground up. Some of his brand new team members had some concerns knowing that it was James' first run at being a CEO. They were discussing James at a meeting he wasn't attending. And one of the executives, when he found out that James was an ultra runner, said, "You know what? We'll be fine. He's going to do great things." And that guy was right. James not only completed the project, but he went on to build the success of the hospital, which was rated best in class only 18 months after it opened. So he's gone on to run other successful organizations. Even now, and he's almost 70, he's still running marathons and offering great contributions in leadership roles. And in a conversation I had with James some time ago, he said, I gave a speech once to a law firm, and they wanted me to talk about the hospital project. He said, a project of that significance is a lot like training for a marathon. You have to have the vision, you have to plan it, and part of it, the goal then is to never give up. So what's the commonality between me and James? Well, I'd say it's endurance. We both faced adversity in achieving goals that were years away, but we set goals that were deeply embedded in what was important to us personally. We understood where our strengths were and what might hold us back. We took disciplined steps to execute against clearly defined goals, and we both continually leaned into support from others, as well as to get feedback and direction. And James and I both crossed our finish lines. I believe that these qualities can be leveraged in our work with our clients to help them, and for those of you who are leaders, with your teams and other leaders as well, to develop greater control, vision, motivation, and staying powers to keep folks on their leadership journey. And I'm excited to share the model with you today. So why do we have this concept right now? Why is this important at this moment? Well, in all honesty, I can't think of a better time for a model that looks further than the present moment. Because when we look at the present moment, it's not always so great for everyone. I don't need to re-traumatize us all with the stressors that we've experienced since March of 2020. But even as we emerge, we're seeing the stress levels are still very pervasive for people. When we think about the stress and burnout that leaders and employees and everyone in our surroundings are experiencing, they're pretty significant. So I'd love for you to just use the chat. What are some of the things that you're hearing, or maybe you're saying yourself about stress right now? Maybe if you're coaching people, you're consulting with people, what are some of the things you're hearing? If you're a manager of other people, what are some of the messages that you're getting from folks? Lots of clients struggling with sleep and mood. People are treading water. Absolutely. People don't feel like they're making a lot of progress right now. They're just trying to hang on. And I think that that's a really important component of what we're seeing. High reactivity, great. Anxiety around interactions. These are so working many, many hours of overtime. That's a huge part of what we're going to talk about today, is just this idea that people feel like they're sprinting all the time. Mental illness is way, way up. That's right. There's been more utilization of mental health services than has been really tracked in recent years. So the Talent Development Conference, and everybody said that they're stressed and that all the traditions are being tossed out. That's what a great segue, because I think that's really part of what we're talking about here. These things don't really work. And it's interesting, over collaboration. There was a piece from the Harvard Management tip of the day today on avoiding over collaboration, very timely. So, there's just a lot of stress happening right now for folks. Going back to the American Psychological Association, they do a Stress in America survey every year. And in 2020, what they found is that 1 in 5 people said that their mental health was worse than the same time in 2019. Now, that survey is actually almost, so now over a year old. So I don't know what it is now. My gut tells me it's more like not, 90%. By the way, I've neglected to record, so I'm going to make sure that we're recording from here on out. And amongst employed adults, 68% reported that their job or employment was negatively impacted by the pandemic. And only slightly less, 67% of people reported that money is a significant source of stress in their lives. We're not even talking about work, we're talking about money, right? It's such a basic order need. So the people are experiencing a lot of stress. And then in the work realm, DDI, which is a major consulting firm, they do a survey every year called their Global Leadership Forecast. And in February of this year, their survey found that 86% of high potentials are at risk of burnout. 86%. That's like everybody. At least it feels like everybody. Statistically, it's not, but it feels like it. And 60% of leaders feel they are used up at the end of every workday. Now, to me, that sounds like a pretty strong indicator of burnout. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I attended the American Psychological Association virtual conference, and one of the presenters said that through their research, they were finding that the people at the highest risk of burnout were those at the highest levels in the organizations. So as a result, this kind of came up right in the chat. People are realizing that the models they have for leadership just aren't as sustainable as they might have thought they were. People are tired, and they're recognizing that they might need strategies that can help them longer term. So utilizing the model I'm going to suggest may help them build those strategies to be beyond the flavor of the moment. And I think of this as a distinctive tool to really separate out kind of what I call the short-term quick win model, right? Organizations will reward short-term all day long because ultimately organizations aren't really people and they want you to produce short-term results all the time. And so often without care and without intentionality, leaders can get sucked into that too. And, maybe without ill intention, but can get into the quick mentality of, we just have to get through this really tough time. I know it's going to be hard. We got to all work 12-hour days for the next couple of weeks, but then it's going to pass. But the problem is it doesn't pass. And there's no finite end to that time parameter, to that need to sprint. And so endurance leadership, I believe, can help leaders be able to say, okay, yes, we may need to put in extra effort, but how are we going to pace ourselves? What strategies can we take to ensure that we're recovering properly? What's really connecting with me if I have to put out this effort to keep me focused and internally motivated? So we'll talk about all of those things in a little bit. So this to me is what I think of as the guts for greatness, because it's about prioritizing the long view. Now, the one thing I want to say is I've already used a bunch of terms that you may not know. So let me just quickly say endurance leadership. Well, endurance athlete is a term that a lot of people don't even know what that necessarily means. I define endurance athlete as anyone who can sustain high performance over a long period of time in an athletic endeavor. So yes, that might mean somebody who's running multiple marathons or somebody who's doing decathlons, but it also might mean somebody like a Tiger Woods, right? Or a LeBron James, people who are demonstrating high performance consistently again and again, year after year. It also doesn't mean elite athlete. So I am what they call in the world of triathlon an age grouper, which means I'm just some schlub who's showing up and trying to do these things. And my competition is other people who are in my age group, which I recently aged into the antique category. It's a new designation. It's kind of fun. But there, that doesn't designate, that being elite doesn't designate an endurance athlete. And I believe that's true also for what I'm calling endurance leaders, people who are exhibiting high performance over long periods of time. Now, you might know some examples of very famous endurance leaders, people like Richard Branson, who has been running Virgin since 1972, or Bernard Arnault, who has been the CEO of the company that owns Louis Vuitton since 1989. So these are examples of more kind of famous leaders, but people like James and people that you might know, they're not grazing the cover of Fortune magazine, but they are quietly and successfully leading for decades. So I just want to clarify what those terms are before we move on. Let me jump into the model just to kind of get us moving in this direction. So the model ostensibly has 4 parts: anchoring your mindset, excel in execution, forge discipline, and leverage support. So this model is really intended to be a whole systems model, meaning, the parts aren't sequential. So I'm going to start with one part around anchor your mindset, because I think it is kind of the periodic table, the bottom of the periodic table of the model. But ultimately, any one part of it, if there's a change, it's going to change the other parts as well. And if there's a change, even in the external environment, all of these elements are going to change as well. So let me start moving into the model here so we can understand what the heck I'm talking about. So the first part is about anchoring mindset. This has 4 components to it as I see it. And the first part is knowing your mission. So what do I mean by that? Well, some people call it knowing your why, which I appreciate, but knowing your why for me can sometimes feel a little bit like it might change from time to time. But when you think about a mission, we associate missions with going to Mars, right? We associate missions with very long-term goals. Well, it used to be a long-term goal to go to Mars. Really something very, very deeply embedded and important. And both endurance athletes and endurance leaders share qualities around kind of the intrinsic motivation that mission provides. So McCormick et al. In 2017 showed the importance of motivation in self-regulation in endurance athletes. But before that, 2011, Chinar and al. Showed that while intrinsic and extrinsic factors both affect employees completing tasks, intrinsic factors were more motivating than extrinsic factors. So in other words, while title and prestige and wealth, they may be motivating to leaders, they may be less motivating than those internal drivers. And that's where mission really comes in. So let me talk about that mission with a couple of examples. This is Thasunda or T. Duckett. T is the CEO of TIAA. And she describes her mission through the lens of her personal experience of growing up with very little financial stability. She states that her mission is to make sure that my parents and people like my parents are making the best financial decisions they can. That's a personal long-term mission. That isn't something that she's going to achieve with her quarterly goals or even her annual goals. This is a lifelong pursuit for her. Another example from the world of endurance athletes is Chris Nikich. And Chris proved to the world that people with Down syndrome can do amazing things, like being the first person with Downs to finish an Ironman race, which he did last year. And Chris's mission is to be 1% better in one aspect of his life every day. Again, you can hear the personal component of that. It really doesn't matter what he's doing on any given day. It's going to change that part of what drives him. That type of intrinsic motivator can really anchor mindset for the long term. The next is to establish a baseline. So, and I will give all credit, my coach, Mo Tobin, is on this call. So I'm going to talk a lot about the things that Mo and I do together. Part of understanding as an endurance athlete, how to achieve the goal you want to set is you got to know where you're starting from. And often we do this backwards. Sometimes we set where we want to go and we set up our path to get there, and we don't really take account of where we're starting from. So, thinking about if you want to run the Marine Corps marathon and, 6 months earlier, you're kind of a couch potato and you can't run around the block, the training you're going to need to get there is going to look a lot different than the training that you're going to do if you ran a half marathon 6 months prior, right? The same is true for endurance leaders, beginning with baseline data, whether it's business factors or leadership factors. Getting things measured can help the leader know, where are the gaps, right? How big are they? What am I going to do? How am I going to successfully execute? And what's the plan I have to get there? So as a coach, and some of you on the call are coaches and consultants, we often start with baseline data with people. We might do some psychological assessments. We might use Nancy Parsons' CDR assessment. We might use 360-degree assessments to get some data. And that's really important because otherwise we don't know what plan we should set up for success. I'm going to give an example of a client. I'm going to call her Cassie throughout, and you're going to hear about Cassie a lot. So Cassie has a goal to become a C-suite leader. Part of that is driven by her goal. Her mission is to be a successful executive and a successful mommy, and those are her words, and to be able to empower and highlight women in her organization, particularly women of color. So her goal, that's a long-term mission. She's not going to achieve that in the next 2 years. But she knows she has to get to that C-suite role in order to make part of that happen. So her first thing is, where am I starting from? Well, she is 2 roles away from that C-suite role. So we need to understand that. What's the baseline before we can start thinking about, okay, how can she get to that next role? Which brings me to the next step, which is to build the plan. Okay, I know what this big long-term goal, what's motivating me long-term. Maybe I've set some leadership goals for myself that are pretty lofty. Now I know where my baseline is. Now I can set up the plan. Again, endurance athletes do this all the time. What's the final goal? What's the A race, as it's known? The big goal you're trying to reach, and working backwards from there to say, what's the 6-month plan? What am I going to do over the next month? What am I doing this week? What does every day look like? Mo and I have a training plan that I look at every single day. And all of that is to help me get to a bigger goal. So endurance leaders also can bring this same thinking into place, right? So go back to Cassie for a moment. Okay, Cassie's 2 roles away. So her goal is in the next 2 years to get to an SVP role, senior vice president role, which could feed into that C-suite role. Well, now we can start working backwards over the next year. What are the leadership qualities that Cassie needs to be able to demonstrate that would make her ready to take on for that promotion in the next 1.5 to 2 years? So again, bringing it back to a plan. And then prepare for known obstacles. This is something that, as a coach, I will say I have often been pretty terrible at doing. As an endurance athlete, I'm really good at doing it. When you're looking at completing an event that's a year away, you're bound to have things that are going to come into play that are going to detract from that. You might have a family holiday for 2 weeks in Europe. Oh, wait, we used to do that. You might have a stay-at-home vacation for 2 weeks. You might have a baby. There's a lot of things that might happen in a year that you can already plan for. As a coach, as a consultant, or as a leader to other people that you might be working with in these areas, plan for those things. Why would we expect that people are going to be able to deliver the exact same amount of energy and effort every week of every year between now and the time we're going to be done working with them? That's absurd. And I've done it all the time. So thinking about what are the known obstacles, and let's plan around those, because the better we plan, the more successful that person can be. Maybe you've got quarterly pressures at the end of the year, Q4 pressures, and you're working on some leadership goals or objectives. Maybe you need to ease off the gas of those for that time. And let's talk about that and know that so you can plan successfully. So all of those things really come under creating the right type of mindset to be able to execute for the long term. So I offer some questions. I'm not going to bring all of these into play right at this moment, but I want to just direct your attention towards these and recognize that there are some questions you might be able to ask yourself. If you're working as a coach or consultant, you might ask some of the people you're working with. So I might ask you to really think for a moment about your ultimate mission. What is your ultimate mission? What are you uniquely on the planet to do? Now, I don't want you to answer that in chat. The first time I attempted to complete this exercise, it took me about 6 months. So if you have it down, I'm totally impressed. But you might really want to give this some thought, because it might be the intrinsic motivator that can keep you going for several years. Let me stop and pause for a moment. Anything, Lindsay, that we're getting here in chat? All right. We will keep going. And I'm going to leave some time at the end as well for us to be able to chat a little bit more. So let me move on to execution. Excelling in execution is pretty important if you are an endurance athlete. So the first part of this is train every day. We've got 5 parts to the execution component, by the way. Train every day. Endurance athletes train every day. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily doing the same thing every day, or even that they are exercising at some enormous level every day. So, for example, a decathlete isn't practicing all 10 of their sports every day, but they may be doing something every single day. The same can be said for the people that I've seen that are really successful endurance leaders. They find ways to train every day as a leader. So something that they're working on every single day to make them a little bit better. BJ Fogg, who's a researcher at Stanford, introduced the term minimum viable effort. He actually did it in a technology context, but that term was taken up by James Clear in his book, Atomic Habits. And it really refers to what's the smallest unit of behavior change that you can make and replicate kind of day after day. When I'm working with leaders as a coach, sometimes we set goals that we might think, well, you're not going to be in that situation every single day. So maybe if you're trying it a couple of times a week or a month, that's good. But the reality is, it's really not enough to really create change. Being able to execute on some level every single day is what will drive that behavior forward. So let me go back for a second to, actually, let me talk about a different executive than Cassie, but another endurance leader, what I call an endurance leader in training, somebody who's kind of in their middle career, but have been very successful and are talking with this kind of mindset, said, every day I must try to be a little bit better. I can always determine one thing I can improve in my leadership every single day. So what's that little tiny minimum viable effort that we can make? The next part is using what I call the action reflection cycle. I'm not the first person to invent that term. Gibbs talked about action reflection cycle ages ago. David Peterson, who's a very famous coach, is using that term a lot right now as well. Reflection's been around for a long, long time, right? Rumi talks about reflection. Lots of developmental psychologists talk about Dewey, Piaget, Lewin, Kolb, all talk about reflection. But you know what? In sport, reflection isn't a nice to have. It's a must have. Think about Tom Daley. Yes, the knitter, for those of you who've been paying attention to the Olympics, a knitter, Olympic diver, Tom Daley here, and Maddie Lee winning the gold medal last month at the Tokyo Olympics. Can you imagine what could possibly happen if they didn't reflect after every dive? It may only be a moment. It might be a word. It might be a phrase. It might be a look. But taking that very brief second to reflect with one another will bring them into a better place for the next dive, and with their coach as well. So using an action reflection cycle is really critical for endurance leaders as well. It doesn't mean that they have to take an hour of protracted time to focus in a reflective way. And as other people have, when I've talked with this about people, sometimes people reflect and just think negatively. So it isn't about, let me reflect and just find all the things I didn't do right. It's really about what did I do well? What small corrections can I make for the next effort? So bringing this in can be critical. Laneige in 2019 found that when leaders engaged in daily self-reflection, they experience less depletion and heightened work engagement. So the challenge is getting to leaders to put aside the excuse that they don't have what? Time. Yes, I can see your mouths moving. Time, right? Time is the biggest way to say, I don't wanna, is what I call it. I don't wanna. We'll talk about that in discipline. The next part is what I'm gonna steal directly from marathon language, running the mile you're in. And the point of this is when the miles are slogging by, you can get really down if all you're thinking about is the miles left to go. There's kind of an old understanding in marathon that the halfway point is not at mile 13, it's at mile 20, because the mental effort for those last 6 miles is so important. And if you're not focused on it, it can really, really drag you down. So what do you focus on in that time? You focus on things. I focus on things, thanks Thanks, Simo. What's my heel strike? What's my breathing like? How even is my weight distribution on my feet? People count back from 100 using different strategies. What do all of those things do? They give us back self-control. They provide self-efficacy at a time when otherwise the mental game can be pretty agonizing. So I want to illustrate this idea from an endurance leader who shared a similar philosophy. He said, a few years ago, our business was severely disrupted by hurricanes. It was easy to get discouraged, but instead we stepped away from woe is me and stepped into the messiness, focusing on the next best thing. Rather than getting swept up in the fears of the long term, we got up and got after the daily focus. And then what he said next, I really love. He said, calm is contagious. When we allow ourselves to take back the control that we actually have, and I see this as a real challenge for a lot of leaders and a lot of individuals right now, is they just don't feel like they have any control over what's happening, and they're getting just beleaguered by that. So being able to say, what is under my control and how can I manage my energy and my effort can really be important for excelling in execution. The next is learning how to pace. Marathon runners know that if you let other runners affect you at the start of a race, you're going to start out too fast, burn up your energy stores too quickly, and possibly halfway through look like an avatar that just ran out of juice, right? You could run out of all of your resource, and our resources are not infinite. They are finite. So in order for marathoners to execute against a plan for a strong race, they have to manage their pace. Sometimes it means keeping the same pace throughout, but oftentimes it can mean maybe I speed up a little for a few miles, then I go back down to a more manageable pace, then I speed up a little, then I go back to a manageable pace. So it's about really protracted, planned efforts of intensity. And this is a place where I think leaders could really benefit from thinking this way. So again, leaders feel very pressured by the business, or sometimes even by their own comparisons or their own goals, to just continually push as hard as they can. But we're seeing some of the ramifications of that: burnout, health issues, performance. So being able to create a plan that says we're going to work this hard for a protracted period of time, and then we're going to beg off, is important. I'll give you an example. I've known for several years a CEO of a small manufacturing firm. She's been the CEO for at least 2 decades. She had a fire in one of her 3 plants last year. And that meant that she had to quickly make up in the other plants for the losses they were incurring. And they had to move those 2-shift operations into 3-shift operations. She had to transfer, a bunch of her staff. They had, all the changes in logistics, and people had to work really, really hard. And what she said to them is, look, this is not going to last forever. And however much time it takes, I'm going to offer an extra day off per pay period for every single person for their efforts. You know what? That allowed people to know, A, this isn't going to last forever, or she's going to pay us a lot, but also that there was going to be a time intentionally to beg off from that difficulty. It took about 8 weeks for the plant to get back to semi-operational. And then she said, look, I'm expecting people to take this time. The time is meant for you to recover. So being able to figure out exactly how to articulate when to speed up and when there's time to slow down, because none of us can sprint a marathon. The last part is recovery, and I've kind of hit on that already a little bit. So, again, there isn't an endurance athlete in the world who doesn't have rest built into their training schedule. Otherwise, they risk injury and overuse and prolonged fatigue. Does anyone know how many, this is a quiz question, gold star to whoever can answer it without looking up on Google, how many hours a night LeBron James sleeps? Roughly? It's kind of a rolling 9, 7.5, 10. Kudos to the 10. 10, sometimes 12. He brags sometimes he gets 12 hours of sleep. We might be like, that's preposterous. Well, but is it really? Look at what we're getting from a performance output. He knows that that kind of recovery is critical for him to be able to perform at the level that he does. Why would leaders think any differently, that they wouldn't need time to recover? And I've seen great endurance leaders who do understand the importance of recovery, that you cannot drive for such an intense pace over long periods of time without risking burnout or prolonged stress. So recovering mentally and physically, you can actually build those cognitive and emotional resources back, right? Return them back so that you have the energy to sustain for the longer term. What are some of you doing with either your clients or maybe with your team members or for yourself to help you recover? You know, maybe it's additional sleep. Maybe it's just small breaks throughout the day. Maybe you have concerted away from screen time. Maybe you meditate. What are some things that you do to take care of yourself and ensure you recover? And if nobody answers, then I know you're in the right place because we're talking about the importance of recovery. Want to put it in the chat? Please chat away your answers here. Brief walks and breaks. Awesome. Something daily I enjoy. Fantastic. Enough time for sleep. Walk my dogs. That's a double win. You get the dog time and you get the walk time, allowing it time for enough sleep. Yep, I know many people are trying to talk about sleep as a superpower, getting enough of it to really be able to critically recover. Excellent. So let's just summarize again back with some questions, right? So thinking about all the things we covered in excelling in execution, you know, what are some of the behaviors that you might commit to? And that's actually the question I'll ask you to really focus on. What specific behaviors will you commit to this next week that will get you one step closer to your goal? Maybe articulate one thing you're willing to do. Minimum viable effort. BJ Fogg would say, such a small effort, it almost feels like it's not worth writing down. One thing you can do to get closer to your goal. Oh, lovely. We have people who are musicians, children's playtime, all sorts of great things. Wonderful. So let's keep moving here and talk a little bit about forging discipline. So there's 4 components of forging discipline. And this is the part that a lot of people get very squirmy on because we don't always love to talk about discipline. We love to talk about resilience, but we don't love to talk about discipline necessarily. So I'm going to go there. We'll go gently, but recognizing that maintaining discipline in multiple ways can really help us sustain our energy for the long term. So the first part of this is about building mental toughness. Mental toughness is really more than resiliency. And I can go into some definitions, but the way that I would summarize it is think of it as resilience is what can help you overcome a difficulty. But mental toughness helps you to prosper and thrive in the face of any adversity. So both can be very useful, but mental toughness can allow you to really be performing at your best in a way that you might not have even known. So I'm going to use this picture as an example. So this is Des Linden. Anybody know who Des Linden is besides Mo? Don't raise your hand. Mo knows who Des Linden is. Des became the first American woman to win the Boston Marathon in 33 years in 2018. All with temps in the high 30s and headwinds up to 25 miles an hour. Now, I don't know when the last time was that you were in weather like that. My guess is you didn't really want to just stand around outside. let alone run the Boston Marathon. But Des said in an interview that it wasn't resilience, it was mental toughness that helped create her win. And she said, people see the win, but what they don't realize is that it was 30 years in the making. It was her sixth time running Boston. She had been working and working to build her toughness. She said, it looks like an overnight success, but there's so much mental toughness that went into that. Des grew up in Southern California. She lives and trains in Michigan, and she runs outside in all sorts of weather. That's a great example of mental toughness. And to give you another quote from in the endurance leadership space. So American Apparel founder Ryan Holiday has this quote that's challenging, but I think is important. He says, comfort is the worst kind of slavery because you're always afraid that something or someone will take it away. But if you can not just anticipate, but practice misfortune, then chance loses its ability to disrupt your life. Now, Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss, these names some of you might know, are big stoicism advocates. I'm not suggesting you go do what they do and go live on the street for 30 days to prove how mentally tough you are. But, leaders doing things like stepping out of your comfort zone to reach a higher goal, that minimum viable effort we just talked about. Are you pushing at the edge of what's comfortable? For Cassie, whose goal is to kind of take up more space in big meetings, it's taking an improv class, which is terrifying for her. That's a way for her to build her mental toughness so that when she is in meetings, she can speak extemporaneously and feel very comfortable doing that. Or maybe it's getting up an hour earlier to be able to get your reflection time or meditation time. So these kinds of tools that can help build that mental toughness. It's hard work. It's really hard work. But go back to personal control. What are the small things you can do? Being uncomfortable. If you don't want to do it, that's okay. Sometimes I sit with my clients and say, just sit here and feel the I don't wanna. It's okay. We can sit here and be, have your internal temper tantrum about what we're working on and that you don't want to do it. And then let's talk about why you committed to it in the first place. And inevitably, they come back to working on those things, but it's hard work. Agility is really the next component. And that is kind of going back to Des. She shifted her strategy the day of the race to meet the needs because she had practiced in so many different environments. She had built her agility. She had to stay, she ended up not warming up because she wanted to stay warm and dry longer. So she had to take her first couple miles slower. But she had such agility built in that she was able to overcome that. Think of cross training if you're into athletics at all. Cross training is a great way to remain agile. What's the equivalent of leadership cross training? It might be things like gaining perspective from your biggest adversary. It might mean looking at what competitors are doing, or going and spending time in a different industry, or maybe taking a job in a totally different part of an organization. All of those things can help leaders build their ability to be agile when situations might not be so predictable. Moving to plan B. So at the beginning, we talked a little bit about, planning for known obstacles. It's also good to plan sometimes for unknown obstacles. Again, leaders do this often in their business. Most leaders have all sorts of contingency plans built in. Endurance athletes do as well. Nobody rides a bike across the United States and hopes they don't get a flat tire, right? They build that in. But endurance leaders often are thinking about, what are the contingencies in the business? What if we can't sell that customer that $1 million, medical device that we thought we were going to be able to do? What's our contingency plan? What are their contingency plans around leadership? So talking about Cassie, what if she can't be in these meetings that she's hoping to have a lot of influence in? Where can she practice this? What are the environments that might help her to still work on her goals and not have it tied into one specific place? builds that agility, builds that ability to respond in different situations. And then lastly, learning from the epic fail. This is sometimes one of the hardest things to do. And as a coach, as an individual, for me to epic fail, most of you saw my LinkedIn post when I epically failed trying to do this presentation a couple of weeks ago. It's not fun to look at your failure and go, okay, what happened here? And as a coach, it can be really difficult as well. But there are times when no matter how many plans we put in place, things just don't work. And in those moments, it takes discipline to say, it's not working. What's going on? Why is this happening? What can I take away from this? And maybe most importantly, how can I redefine success? So a quick example. I worked years ago with a brilliant doctor. She was amazing. She was working in R&D for this medical device company. She was doing such a good job. They made her the medical director. I was called in to coach her because she was not being successful in this endeavor. And they saw that she had the potential. Her boss really wanted her to be successful. She was miserable in this job. It was doing nothing that motivated her or inspired her. And the day I knew it was an epic fail is the day she started our call by saying, Ann, all I want to do is stay home all day and pet the cat. And at that moment, I had to say, I mean, it's kind of like, wow, that's something. But at that moment, being able to say, okay, what's going on here? What do we need to do? We've got a course. We got to not just course correct. We got to shift. We got to go find a different playing field. And to her credit, she did. We put a plan together. She kind of put a whole speech together, which she gave to her boss, and they found a role for her, another role that benefited from her R&D expertise and background. And she was much happier in that role. So again, not that every failure works out to some success, but in those moments, being willing to sit in that and recognize it and figure out the next plan. And lastly, oh, sorry, we're not lastly. I'm going to stop and just give the questions for a moment. So this is about forging discipline. Again, a number of questions around these areas to help you think about how can I forge discipline, or how can I encourage the people I'm working with around discipline. And the one I'll really focus on is that very first one, which is, where are you pushing at your edge of what's comfortable to achieve more? Where are you willing to push yourself out of your comfort zone to do more? Give you a chance to reflect on that for just a second. And then as you're reflecting, we're going to move forward because I do want to leave a few minutes for questions. The last part is about leveraging support. So the first part of leveraging support is to get the right coach. And that might be one person, or it might be several. And I'm going to talk more about other coaches as well. But if you're someone who is really working in a leadership capacity and you have the capability to have a coach, make sure you have the right coach. And endurance athletes athletes of all type use coaches, because coaches provide characteristics that are essential for success in athletes. They help them develop their mental and physical, technical, and tactical abilities. And according to Kavasanu in 2008, they also help them win. So I want to hit on some of the qualities that are often attributed to coaches. And if you are a coach, I challenge you to read this list and think about how often you are demonstrating these qualities with your clients. These are qualities attributed to athletic coaches. So I've kind of taken the athlete word and changed it into leader. I know for myself, I can look at this list and sometimes feel a little convicted that I'm not really doing all of these. And the one that sticks out in my head the most is demanding for the sole purpose of making the leader better. Demanding for the sole purpose of making the leader better. How willing are we as coaches? And if you're a leader who's coaching your team, this is also a great list. How are you showing up as a coach? If you are looking for a coach, These are some of the qualities that you might want to be thinking about as you investigate your coaches. Let me move on to talk about make anybody a coach. So, there's a lot of different types of coaches that you can have. There's endurance athletes who are part of a team, leverage their team members to improve. They give and receive feedback from each other because they know it's going to help them get better. But they might also use a variety of other resources that are kind of coaches in a way. So they've got people helping them stay accountable to showing up for their track practice and a training buddy. They've got people who help them with the logistics. So they've got a Sherpa buddy, somebody who's helping them make sure things get done. They've got people who commiserate with them, which might be their post-race drinking buddy. They might have, people who are there to help celebrate them when they succeed. So they're cheerleader. All of those are roles. I mean, I call them kind of all coaches, but I'm essentially saying, get the right levels of support. All of those people help an athlete stay the course and find the courage and resilience to stick on their path. So why not do the same? Endurance leaders often are asking all sorts of people for feedback to help them stay accountable, to ensure that they are walking the right path, right? They may have all those other supports as well. They might have accountability partners at home. They may have community members. They might have a lot of people who are helping them stay true to their long-term leadership journey. So, there's a couple questions that I like to talk about that I think can make anybody in your work environment a coach to you without them having any responsibility. All they need is to be able to observe you. And there's two questions. The first one is, what's one way that I've been successful as a leader over the past month? And the second question is, what's one leadership quality or behavior I should focus on improving over the next month? Bada bing, bada boom, that person has just become a coach to you. So we can really get a lot of great data, not just relying on the 360 feedback at the beginning of our coaching engagement or at the end of our coaching engagement. Getting this feedback along the way can be extremely helpful for our long-term leadership goals. Fall in love with metrics. Oh boy, people, I have never met an endurance athlete who didn't bore me to tears with their metrics, including myself. We love our metrics. Tracking our heart rate data, our VO2 max, don't ask, our pace, all of these different things is really critical. And for good reason, right? It gives us information about how we are progressing. Leaders track metrics all the time. Critical, right? For organizational success. But sometimes when leaders are faced with leadership goal tracking, they're like, well, it's too squishy. I don't really know I'm just going to kind of work on it. Well, actually, we could probably find ways to track those metrics. What behavior do you want to change? Is it to show up, more vocally in meetings? Well, let's track how many meetings you're in where you've actually asked a question. You can track that information. I can ask your colleagues, is that happening? How many times? Quantifying those metrics can really help us stay focused, right? What gets measured gets done, as the old saying goes. And now there's so many apps out there. There's productivity apps. There's strategic planning apps. There's blood pressure apps. If you're, maybe you have you're a hothead in a meeting and you've got to make sure that you're keeping your blood pressure under control. Take a look at it before the meeting starts. And again, when you're starting to get worked up, there's lots of ways to make metrics useful as a leader. And again, by tracking those, we're more likely to stay on our path to success. I think the one important thing here is metrics shouldn't be arduous. They should be easy to track, and you shouldn't have too many of them. And then the last thing, at the risk of sounding like a bumper sticker, is build an attitude of gratitude. And why is this important? It isn't just because it sounds good. It's because it's a well-studied mediating variable, both in sports performance and in leadership performance. So Gabbana et al. In 2017 found that gratitude had a negative correlation with burnout and was positively correlated with sports satisfaction amongst athletes. And another 2017 study of athletes found that across cultures, athletes with high levels of gratitude exhibited increased life satisfaction when they also had high levels of mindfulness. The Center for Creative Leadership, which is another consulting organization, had a blog not too long ago where they talked about gratitude and its core to motivation to self-improvement. It also helps foster long-term thinking. It helps people work more productively and to thrive in the face of change. So as leaders who are really thinking for the long term, how to incorporate gratitude into your leadership practice. Maybe it's thanking people very specifically, not just saying, hey, thanks, but really thank you for your effort on this project. Thank you for pulling in some data that we didn't know we needed. Being very specific with people. Maybe it's starting a meeting with a moment of gratitude. How much would that freak everybody out, right? Just saying, let's all say something we're grateful for. But it can really help people resonate back with what life is about for them and remembering those elements of satisfaction that are helping us sustain energy for the long term. Coaches, when was the last time you started a coaching meeting with gratitude? So there's different ways that we can do this. Giving to others is another very powerful way to recognize our own gifts. One of the things about giving, whether it's donations or volunteer work, that automatically helps us recognize our own gifts. People have much higher levels of gratitude when they are in service to other people. So again, build an attitude of gratitude. So last piece is to just think about these support level questions. How can you leverage the support in your environment? And I will bring you back to that last piece on gratitude. How can gratitude help you achieve your goals? Where could you incorporate it to help you stay motivated? So give that another moment of thought. And then lastly, I just want to end by saying, I'm talking about endurance leadership as something that really is a lifelong sport. There's got to be some joy along the journey. It's really a mindset and a way of growing. It is not an end point. So keep perspective. Laugh at yourself or laugh with your clients, laugh with the people you work with. Embrace the fact that there are going to be mistakes along the way. Stay grateful and humble and remain inspired. And I'm going to just share with you this inspirational figure to me. This is Chrissy Wellington. She was a legend in the field of triathlon. She was a 10-time Ironman winner, including 4 times winning the Ironman World Championship in Kona, Hawaii, and 7 times won the World Championship at the half Ironman distance. I had the privilege of seeing Chrissy twice when I was volunteering at races, and her face looked like this all the time. I'm not joking. She just looks like this. And this is her quote: never, ever give up and smile. So there is no finish line. Let's have some fun along the way. So thank you for going with me on this journey through endurance leadership. I want to offer the last few minutes to some questions. People can take themselves off of mute. If you have a question, you can also type a question in the chat. We'll chat while we have in the background Sister Madonna Booter, who is known as the Iron Nun. She started doing long distance running in her late 40s. She has retired now at the age of 90 from Ironman racing, but these are all pictures of her in her last several years of Ironman racing. So would love to entertain some questions. Feel free to raise your hand, take yourself off of mute, however you would like. Questions, thoughts, reflections, challenges?
Anne, this is
Wow,
Nancy. Hi,
Nancy. Hello.
how are you? This is great. No, really. And I have a question. Obviously, I admire that you're such an endurance athlete and all and have been. Uh, that does amaze me. And, many of us are far less than that in our efforts. So my, for me, and so my question is, the mission gives me the endurance, that piece of sticking with it and really working hard. And then maybe it's where the piece where we need coaches in our lives, but I really lack on the discipline and structure. I mean, in all honesty. So I'm always pushing and pushing myself, pushing others, going in the right direction. Sometimes we take circles, and I've had many failures, of course, along the way. So just curious, when people aren't as well, like in the psychometrics, don't have the prudence level.
Yeah. Right.
That some of you have, what do you suggest?
That's a great question, Nancy, because I think most people do feel like that, right? Like we have the best of intentions. Like I want to do that. And I know you enough to know that you're always running at, 100 miles an hour because you have so many interesting things going on. And what I think often happens is we look towards these big goals, right? We look for this big thing versus looking at that small amount of change, right? Instead of saying like, okay, I'm going to work out every single day. I haven't worked out for a week. So next week, I'm going to work out every single day. And then, you do it for 2 days and then you're like, oh, crud, I missed a day. And now you feel like you've blown the whole thing, right? Instead of saying, you know what, if I work out one day next week, that's better than last week. That's my minimum viable effort for the week. That much change, right? What's a small unit of change that we can make? Often, and this is, I'll refer back to James Clear because his book Atomic Habits is so good about talking about this in terms of not putting the goals first and then the behaviors, like starting with the identity and the behaviors and then making the goals kind of come from that. So I think it's often being a little kinder to ourselves, in all honesty, which sounds funny when you think, oh, there's, these endurance athletes are all hardcore, but there's a little bit around, you know what? Okay, today wasn't a great day, but tomorrow is a different story. So maybe I can start tomorrow and maybe I can take what my goal was and cut it in half. And what would that look like? So that might be one way to think about it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Rose, please. Hello.
Hi, I'll put myself on video. Thank you. I like the framework and the process. So thank you for sharing that. I have a question with you, and I guess even as an athlete, but also as a coach, when we look at a process, we start at the beginning and we go at the end. So you build this, one builds on the other, and as you said, they're interconnected. Mm-hmm. How would you approach somebody who's already at the exhaustion level, right? Because a lot of us are either coaching people or ourselves really kind of exhausted. Mm. And, recovery is really important and sort of kind of like getting back to stable, to base. Where would you go? It's really hard for somebody who's kind of not in that headspace or physical space to actually come back and say, where would you go? I'm curious what you would do as an athlete, but I'm also curious as what you would say to a leader.
To a leader. And I think as an athlete, I've certainly experienced that as well, right? So you can sometimes just feel really beleaguered with where you are at the moment. And I think, again, we've got a lot of leaders and individuals who are just feeling, I'm talking about leaders, but obviously a lot of these qualities are things that individuals might feel as well. Yeah. And again, I think it comes back to what's a smaller term goal? I mean, we're talking about ultimate goals, but connecting back in with what's the mission? What is it you really want to do? What do you really want to be? I'm asking people questions like, what do you want your kids to say about you 30 years from now? And, that's a long-term component, but it pulls for people towards something. It's like that becomes a little bit of a rope that they can kind of hang on to. well, what's something we could start working on right now that might help towards that? And it might not be around work. It might not be around athletics. It might be, let's do something completely different outside of either of those spaces. Something that is going to engage you, inspire you, and make people feel like they're getting a little bit of that progress and effort. Because again, I think sometimes people, especially if you're dealing with other, potentially mental health things that are going on for a lot of people right now, it can be hard to emerge from that. So where can I find that self-efficacy? Think about run the mile you're in, right? What can I do to empower myself at this moment, even if it's really, really small, right? So again, I think as an athlete, it's easy to be like, I don't want to do anything. It's like, well, you know what? If you do, 5 minutes, and a lot of people say, that's not even worth my time. Oh, but it is. Actually, it is. My brother, who I also believe is on this call, I remember years ago saying, you know what? You know what's better than if I don't have an hour to work out? 10 minutes is okay. 10 minutes will also it's better than 0. So how can you get someone focused on either, branch out, think from a cross-functional training? Maybe it's go take an art class, something totally different that might help someone expand out of that space, because eventually it will likely work their way back to what they've been passionate about all along.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Would love time for one more question. Danielle, I saw your question in the chat. Thank you for asking it. I will be happy to share the PDF of these slides so you can have these questions. Absolutely pleased to do it. Yeah. Any last questions or thoughts before? Oh, okay. So, yep. Patty said, sometimes when people are already burned out, the first micro step might be identifying a way to take a break. That's a great point, right? Sometimes it's like, how do I actually build the recovery in? That's in and of itself a step, because getting off of the treadmill of I'm just working, I'm in this cycle, I can't seem to get off, recognizing, you know what, I owe it to myself to take this little bit of time, this micro break could be important. Well, thank you all. I know many of you are going to have to go. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that there is something you've been able to take away from this whole concept of endurance leadership. Should you want more information about what I'm doing with this in coaching, please feel free to reach out, Ann@Llumos.com. And I will look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you. It's great.
Thanks, everybody.